Earlier this week, I gave a presentation at a historical fiction conference that was organised by the History Quill, and I was talking about voice in historical fiction. And there was one particular thing that I wanted to share with you now, which was an exercise that came up during. It was an exercise I did with the participants, and it was one that I think was really interesting. People really seemed to enjoy it and found it very useful. It's an exercise that is specifically geared towards helping you find your voice when writing, and specifically looking at tone. So the whole presentation I did was about voice, and we looked at quite a few things to do with voice. So we looked, I was presenting with another author, Jill George. She was really looking at these kind of big scale things of your mission and your character profiles. And I was kind of looking at voice from more of the granular level of doing a lot of talking about sentence structure, talking about vocabulary. And one thing I really wanted to talk about was tone. And I think tone is one of those things that's so important in fiction, but is really difficult to pin down what it is. It's really difficult to sort of put your finger on, oh, this is where this tone is created. And this was just a little exercise that we did. It's one I've also done with my tuition students, with some of my university classes I've done, and I find it a really helpful one. And what it is to simply write a paragraph. And I would recommend, if you're currently writing a story, use your protagonist, use a character that you're particularly interested in. If you're not writing anything, I can give you a character right now. If you just want to use this as an exercise, you can use, we used a character called Robert, who is a administrator in a firm. We don't really need to know what firm for the exercise, because all you're going to do is describe this character walking into an empty room. It's really simple. So we're basically removing all elements of plot. You're not going to go any further. You're not going to think about what's in the room. You're not going to think about anything that's happening. Because the thing I want you to change, I want you to write this paragraph twice. Character walks into room. Yes. Version 1, version 2. And the only difference, I don't want anything different to happen. You just have the character, they walk into the room very neutrally, don't change their expression, don't change how they react, they just walk into the room. I want you to change how the narrative voice feels about the character. Now, how a narrative voice feels is something you've probably thought about quite a lot if you're writing a first-person perspective, but if you are writing third person, it can be something that isn't thought about so much, and it can be something that it can be a place where biases sneak in that you're not aware of. It can be a place where stuff is happening that you haven't necessarily thought about. So I'm going to give you an example, and I'll post a picture of this in the comments as well. This is from the presentation that we did at the History Quill Convention. So I'm going to read you two separate paragraphs. This was about this character, Robert, and I just had him sort of shuffling some pages and had the narrative describing him. So here's the first version. He shuffled the papers with palsied hands, his grey eyes acquiring the familiar glaze they had worn every day these past 20 years. Beyond the cold, hard pane of glass, life was happening, but Robert knew nothing of it. And I'm going to contrast that, and again, check these out in the comments and you'll be able to see the whole thing and look at it in your own time. Contrast that with this second version. Each and every document that passed through Robert's hands was regarded with reverence, scrutinised with a practised eye that cared nothing for the world beyond the vital task he had been handed. Now, I really enjoy these two paragraphs. The plot is exactly the same in both of them. The character is exactly the same. You have a character who's obsessed with his work and who is looking at his work. The location's the same, everything else is the same. The one thing that has changed is the narrative tone. So in the first example, he shuffles his paper with palsied hands, his grey eyes acquiring the familiar glaze they'd worn every day these past 20 years. Beyond the cold, hard pane of glass, life was happening, but Robert knew nothing of it. It feels quite negative. It feels that Robert and his world are boring. It seems he seems really hopeless, you know, or the narrative's opinion of him is hopeless. There does not need to be a character for the narrative to have an opinion on something, just the narrative voice there. The word and word choice really comes into it here. The cold, hard pane of glass. We're talking about, like, we're using these words like cold and hard, and that's starting to make us feel a little bit negative. And that's partly what you choose to describe. You could have described the soft, crumpled fabric he's wearing, but that's not what's being described. What's being described is the cold, hard glass. The life was happening, juxtaposed with Robert knew nothing of it, suggests this is a failing of his. It is something he is missing out on. It is beyond the glass, and he can't see it because of this glaze that has come over his eyes, this glaze that has been there for 20 years. This seems like this is a man who is wasting his life. The flip side, let's look at the second example in a little bit more detail. Each and every document that passed through Robert's hands was regarded with reverence. We've used that word reverence. It's no longer a glaze. It's no longer, just this shuffling palsied hands. We're seeing him holding something with respect, with love, with awe. Putting in a word like that, that's how we're interpreting how he's looking at it. He could be, how does somebody look at something? A word like reverence, you can't find me a proof of reverence. That is something kind of mercurial. Mercurial is not quite the real word there. It's something you can't pin down. It's not a physical, tangible thing. This is interpretation. So putting the reverence in there, that's part of our interpretation as narrators. Sorry, reading it through again. It's represented scrutinized with a practised eye. Now it's a practised eye. We're not listing the years that he has lost in this cause. We're now kind of praising that as a skill. He has practiced, he has become skilled. We're just reframing it as something a bit more positive. His eye cares nothing for the world beyond the vital task he has been handed. Now him not caring about the world is a choice. It's no longer him missing out on something. It's a choice he has, it seems, to some extent made. And the task is described as vital. Vital both meaning important, but also meaning life-giving. So it's that I really enjoy that kind of comparison of these two little paragraphs. As again, to just recap, it's exactly the same plot, it's exactly the same character. So what I would recommend you do is have a go at that right now. Write a short paragraph. Doesn't need to be perfect. This is an exercise. It's probably not going in your book, in your story, whatever you're writing, but just write down your character walking into a room. You can give them another action, but what I would say is don't make it a dramatic plot action. It can be something like shuffling papers that we just had with Robert there. It can be chopping vegetables, something that your character would do that is not out of the ordinary for them. And just practice describing the character with love, describing the character with contempt. If there are two different emotions you would rather practice, great, you can absolutely go with that. Because I think that's a big part of how we feel when we're reading books. If we love characters or if we hate them, that narrative attitude is really important in shaping our feelings. You can have a character who's full of himself, and if the narrative kind of mocks that a little bit, that becomes quite fun. This is something that Jane Austen does very well. I have conflicted feelings about Jane Austen, as anyone who's followed me for a while will probably know. But I think she's brilliant at providing these affectionate reads of characters that's half mocking, half kind, quite half appreciative, I suppose. And so if it's a way to make unlikable characters palatable, it's a way to make unlikable characters fun, it's a way to make likable characters complex, confusing, and you as the author do not need to agree with your narrative voice. And I think sometimes when we're doing narrative voice like that, it's less direct than perhaps if we have first-person narrative, because very often with first-person narrative we're tempted to lean into telling rather than showing and just go, this guy's an idiot, he walked into the room. That's not really useful or interesting. But if you walk into the room and sort of suggesting just the little swaggers that this guy has, or the stumblings, or the kind of the forgetful air that he has to his nature, that's going to give us a much more, it's going to put us more on the same page as readers. What I really encourage you to do, if you have written 2 paragraphs, if you get around to writing 2 paragraphs, is share them with me. I love to see what people do from the exercises I write. Very often when I hold workshops, usually 1 or 2 people will email me. When I'm holding kind of like a Zoom workshop or some sort, people will email me their work afterwards, and it's great. I love to read over what people have written. Sometimes it takes me a while to get back, but I always do. And if you're interested in kind of getting tutoring, getting mentorship, getting guidance with any of your novels, any of your writing, I really usually I'm always interested to hear that, and usually have some space somewhere to kind of help people out, whether that's regularly or as a one-off feedback on your writing. Get in touch. I'm always happy to hear you. Send me these pieces of writing. That will be delightful, and let me know if you have any specific topics that you're struggling with in your writing. I'll be very excited to help out if I can. Take care again.